The Carter mansion looked perfect from the outside. Marble steps gleamed like ivory beneath the afternoon sun, and tall glass windows reflected the sky so clearly they seemed almost unreal. Roses lined the driveway in orderly rows, tended by gardeners who were paid handsomely to maintain their perfection. From the outside, it was the image of wealth, power, and stability. But inside, the house was anything but stable. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the foyer as a young maid rushed out the front door, tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother removing her uniform apron. She just wanted to be gone. Her suitcase wheels rattled across the stone as she half ran to the taxi that had been waiting outside, as if the driver had expected her sudden escape. Adrian Carter, billionaire, philanthropist, and head of Carter Enterprises, stood at the top of the sweeping staircase. He had witnessed this scene too many times to be surprised. With one hand shoved in his pocket and the other holding the rail, he sighed heavily, his jaw tightening. Another one gone. This made the 8th maid in less than 2 months. None had lasted more than 3 days. From the parlor he heard a sharp, crystalline voice. Pathetic girl. Can't even make a bed without wrinkling the sheets. Good riddance. Vivian Carter, his wife, strode into view, her silk robe trailing behind her like a shadow. She was stunning, as always, her honey blonde hair pulled into a loose chignon, her neck draped with pearls. To the outside world, Vivian was elegance personified, but to those who worked inside the mansion, she was something far less enviable, a storm in high heels. Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose. Vivian, was that necessary? She turned sharply, her green eyes flashing with indignation. Necessary? Adrian. She left streaks on the windows. Streaks. How many times do I have to repeat myself? Do you expect me to live in a house where the sunlight breaks into smudges? He walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately, trying to keep his temper calm. Vivian, she was here barely 48 hours. No one is going to learn your expectations overnight. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Oh, forgive me. Shall we lower the bar of cleanliness so that the staff can feel more comfortable? Vivian. Don't start, Adrian. She raised a manicured hand, cutting him off. You're never home long enough to see the disaster I have to live in. These girls don't respect me, and frankly, I won't tolerate incompetence. Adrian's chest rose with a long breath he didn't release. He could argue, but what would it change? The truth was undeniable. His wife's temper had created a revolving door of staff. Gossip about the impossible Mrs. Carter had spread across the city. Agencies were running out of candidates willing to risk working at the mansion. As Vivian swept past him toward the sitting room, Adrian caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror above the console table. For just a moment he saw something else, something beyond the anger. There was weariness in her face, the faint lines of a woman who didn't sleep enough, who carried more inside than she ever admitted. But as quickly as he saw it, the mask of disdain returned. The staff, meanwhile, whispered among themselves in the kitchen. She lasted longer than the last one muttered. Barely, another replied. Mrs. Carter will drive anyone mad. You'd have to be a saint to work here. They laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was fear. Fear of being the next target of Vivian's fury. Adrian sat in his office that evening, staring out at the sprawling gardens beyond the window. The walls of the mansion closed in on him despite their grandeur. He rubbed his temples, exhausted not from work, though his empire demanded much of him, but from the endless tension at home. He thought of their early days of marriage. Vivian had been vibrant then, quick to laugh, radiant in her confidence. Somewhere along the way, that radiance had hardened into something sharp. The gossip columns that once adored her now criticized her every appearance, comparing her to younger socialites. Adrian had tried to reassure her, but his business trips and long hours had left her increasingly isolated, and isolation had turned her brittle. His phone buzzed. A message from his old friend, Daniel Hale, a fellow billionaire and trusted confidant. Heard about the Maid situation again. "Adrian, you need help. There's an agency I use. They specialize in, let's just say, resilient staff. People who don't scare easy." Adrian tapped the link Daniel had sent. The agency's website was simple, almost discreet. They didn't advertise loudly, but their reputation was golden among the wealthy elite. Their staff weren't just trained, they were chosen for qualities most resumes never revealed: patience, adaptability, and strength of character. The next morning, Adrian called the agency. "We've heard of the Carter household," the agent said delicately. "We do have one candidate who may suit. She's different from the usual." "Different how?" Adrian asked. "She has experience handling difficult households. She doesn't intimidate easily. Her references are impeccable." Adrian hesitated. "And she understands what she's walking into? She's aware. And she accepts." Her name was Naomi Brooks. When she arrived 2 days later, the staff eyed her curiously. She was in her mid-30s, tall and graceful, with smooth, dark skin and thoughtful brown eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She wore her hair pulled neatly back and carried herself with quiet dignity. Unlike the others, she didn't fidget nervously at the door or glance around in awe of the mansion. She simply stood, calm and composed, as if she belonged. Adrian greeted her personally in the foyer. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming. I won't pretend this is an easy position. My wife has high expectations." Naomi smiled gently. "I understand, Mr. Carter. I've worked in homes where expectations were as tall as the ceilings. I believe respect and patience can go a long way." Something in her tone made him pause. There was no arrogance, no false bravado, just quiet confidence. He nodded, hoping against hope that she would last longer than the others. And then came the real test, meeting Vivian. Vivian swept into the room as if gliding on air, her silk dress whispering with every step. She looked Naomi up and down with sharp, assessing eyes. "So," she said coolly, "you're the newest attempt. What makes you think you'll succeed where all the others failed?" Naomi met her gaze steadily. "I don't think in terms of success or failure, ma'am. I think in terms of service. My role is to support your household in the way you need." Vivian arched an eyebrow, unused to such a measured reply. Most maids stammered, eager to please, or shrank beneath her scrutiny. This one didn't flinch. "You'll find I'm not easy to please," Vivian said, her voice like a blade. Naomi's lips curved into a small, respectful smile. "Then I'll do my best to meet your standards, Mrs. Carter." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Vivian's eyes narrowed as if she were searching for weakness. But Naomi stood calmly, hands folded, posture dignified. Adrian watched, astonished. For the first time, his wife looked unsettled. Not victorious, not enraged, simply unsure. Vivian turned abruptly and said, "We'll see how long you last." Then she walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Naomi inclined her head politely. "Of course, ma'am." Adrian almost smiled. For the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't dared hope for. Maybe, just maybe, this house of broken glass could begin to heal. From the very first morning, the atmosphere in the Carter mansion shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. Naomi woke before dawn, as was her habit. She moved quietly through the halls, her soft-soled shoes making no sound against the marble floors. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the east windows, the kitchen was already alive with the comforting aroma of fresh bread warming in the oven and coffee brewing in polished silver pots. The other staff noticed. The cook, who had grown used to tense mornings and shouted complaints, found Naomi's presence oddly grounding. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She moved with the calm precision of someone who understood rhythm. Not just the rhythm of chores, but the rhythm of people. Vivian Carter noticed too. She descended the stairs that morning in her usual fashion, silk robe trailing behind her, prepared to critique something, anything. But when she entered the dining room, the table was already laid with meticulous care. Silverware gleamed, napkins folded with crisp edges, the flowers in the centerpiece arranged freshly with roses from the garden. Vivian paused, caught off guard. The previous maids had always waited for her instructions or left details undone. Naomi, however, had anticipated everything. Adrian, already seated with his newspaper, lifted his brows in faint surprise. "Smells good this morning," he remarked. Vivian sniffed. "We'll see." Naomi entered just then, balancing a tray with effortless grace. "Freshly baked bread, Mrs. Carter. The cook suggested croissants, but I thought you might prefer whole wheat rolls today. They're lighter." Vivian's sharp retort stalled on her lips. How did she know? Whole wheat had always been her preference, though most staff forgot after a few days. Naomi placed the basket on the table, bowed her head respectfully, and withdrew without waiting for praise. Vivian leaned back in her chair, unsettled. By the end of the first day, Naomi had reorganized the pantry, arranged the guest rooms, and coordinated the laundry with such quiet efficiency that even the housekeeper remarked she felt the house breathing easier. But Vivian wasn't ready to be impressed. On the second morning, she tested Naomi deliberately. "These windows," she said coldly, standing before the tall glass panes in the sunroom. "They're never polished correctly. I want them spotless. No streaks, not a single one. And I expect it done before lunch." The windows stretched floor to ceiling, dozens of them, gleaming already under the morning sun. Any other maid would have panicked. But Naomi simply nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Carter." She spent the next 3 hours carefully polishing each pane, humming softly as she worked. When Vivian inspected them later, sunlight streamed through without a single smudge. She tried to find a flaw, but couldn't. Instead of satisfaction, irritation rose in her chest. That evening, she called Naomi to her sitting room. "You're very confident," Vivian said, sipping her wine. Naomi stood calmly near the doorway. "I try to do my work with care, ma'am." "Care," Vivian repeated mockingly. "That's what they all say. But they never last. Do you think you're special?" Naomi's expression didn't change. "I don't think of myself as special, Mrs. Carter. I just think every person deserves dignity, including in the way their home is cared for." Vivian blinked. No one had ever answered her like that. Most either groveled or snapped back. Naomi did neither. Her tests grew harsher. She sent Naomi on errands across town at impossible hours. She demanded last-minute wardrobe changes before galas, then criticized her choice of jewelry boxes. She once called Naomi at 2 a.m. to fetch her herbal tea, just to see if she would complain. Naomi never raised her voice, never sighed, never rolled her eyes. She simply did what was asked, with a gentleness that slowly chipped away at Vivian's defenses. Adrian observed from a distance, astonished. The house was quieter. Meals appeared on time, the staff seemed calmer, and for the first time in months, he didn't dread coming home. He watched Naomi work, always present, yet never intrusive, always respectful, yet never subservient. It was as if she carried a stillness within her that spread into the air itself. One afternoon, he found himself lingering in the kitchen doorway, watching as Naomi taught the younger maid how to fold napkins into elegant shapes. The girl laughed nervously, but Naomi encouraged her gently, her voice warm and steady. Adrian realized he was smiling, something he hadn't done in that house for a long time. But for Vivian, the process was slower. She couldn't understand this maid who wouldn't break. And then came the day when Vivian herself broke. It began with a charity luncheon. Vivian had spent hours preparing her outfit, obsessing over every detail. At the event, whispers floated around her, about her age, her husband's absences, even her sharp tongue. Vivian pretended not to hear, but each word lodged inside like a thorn. By the time she returned home, she was shaking with anger she couldn't contain. The moment Naomi approached to offer her tea, Vivian snapped, "Don't you dare look at me like that, as if you pity me. Do you know who I am? Do you know what it takes to stand in my place?" Naomi remained steady, her hands folded. "I only see a woman who looks very tired," Vivian froze. The words pierced deeper than any flattery could. She sank onto the couch, covering her face with trembling hands. I'm not tired. I'm invisible. Do you understand? They look at me as if I'm nothing but Adrian's wife. As if I've already faded. For a long moment, Naomi said nothing. She simply sat beside her, close enough to be present, far enough to respect her space. I understand, Naomi whispered at last. People only see what they want. They don't see the battles you fight when the doors are closed. Vivian's breath hitched. No one, not Adrian, not her so-called friends, had ever spoken to her like that. Her pride wavered, and for the first time in years, she let someone witness her tears. Naomi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You are not invisible, Mrs. Carter. You just feel unseen. There's a difference, and sometimes what we need most is not to be perfect, but to be understood. Vivian sobbed quietly, her defenses crumbling. Adrian, passing by the hallway, paused at the sound of voices. He stopped at the doorway, unseen, and caught a glimpse of his wife, her face buried in her hands, Naomi beside her. He could hardly believe what he saw. Vivian, vulnerable. Vivian, crying. Vivian, letting someone in. It shocked him more than he cared to admit. For years he had convinced himself his wife was simply difficult, bitter, unreachable. But here she was, raw and fragile, confiding in a woman she had tried to break. That night, as Adrian lay awake, he couldn't shake the image. Naomi had done in 2 weeks what he hadn't managed in years. She had reached his wife's heart. Vivian, too, was unsettled by the shift. She told herself it was weakness, that she had made a mistake. But deep down, a small, unfamiliar warmth stirred. It had been so long since she had felt cared for without conditions, without judgment. The next morning, when Naomi brought her tea, Vivian's usual sharp remark never came. Instead, she murmured a soft, almost imperceptible, "Thank you." It was a small word. But in the Carter mansion, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The Carter mansion had once felt like a gilded cage, lavish, beautiful, yet suffocating. But in the weeks after Vivian's quiet breakdown, something subtle began to change. It was as though Naomi had opened a window that had long been sealed shut, letting fresh air seep into every corner. Vivian didn't become soft overnight. Her sharpness was still there, her tongue still quick, but the edges were less jagged. Where she once barked orders with disdain, she now spoke with measured calm, even the occasional pleas. The staff noticed first. They exchanged wide-eyed glances whenever she gave a rare word of thanks. Naomi's presence lingered like steady background music, never intrusive, never loud, yet impossible to ignore. She worked with quiet grace, anticipating needs before they were spoken, offering comfort without making it obvious. But more than her duties, it was her way of seeing people that transformed the house. She looked at Vivian not as the impossible Mrs. Carter, but as a woman carrying wounds too long ignored. Adrian, watching from the sidelines, marveled at the difference. For months he had lived in a house that felt brittle, always one outburst away from shattering. Now he came home to order, to warmth, even laughter on some evenings. He began to realize how deeply he had neglected Vivian's heart while burying himself in business meetings and boardrooms. One evening, as Naomi arranged flowers in the sitting room, Adrian paused at the doorway. "You've done more for this house than I ever could," he said quietly. Naomi glanced up, her hands still among the roses. "I've only done my work, Mr. Carter." He shook his head. "No. You've done more than work. You've given this house peace, and you've helped my wife in a way I didn't think possible." Naomi's eyes softened, but her reply was simple. "Sometimes people don't need fixing, Mr. Carter. They just need someone to listen long enough to remember who they are." The word struck him deeply. Yet peace was never permanent. At a society gala a week later, Vivian overheard a cruel comment from a group of women near the champagne table. "She's trying too hard," one whispered. She'll never be like she was 10 years ago, another smirked. Adrian barely looks at her anymore. The words sliced into her like glass. Vivian excused herself, forcing a smile until she reached the powder room. Once there, she locked the door, staring into the mirror as her hands trembled. The reflection staring back at her looked beautiful, polished, flawless. Yet she felt hideous inside. By the time she returned home, her composure had cracked. She snapped at the staff, raised her voice at Adrian, and slammed her bedroom door. Naomi knocked softly minutes later. "Mrs. Carter, go away," Vivian shouted, her voice thick with unshed tears. But Naomi didn't leave. She opened the door gently and found Vivian sitting at her vanity, makeup streaked, pearl earrings discarded on the floor. "They were laughing at me," Vivian whispered hoarsely, "like I'm some sad old joke." "Maybe they're right." Naomi walked closer, crouching to pick up the earrings. She placed them carefully on the vanity, then looked into Vivian's tear-filled eyes. "Do you want to know what I see?" Naomi said softly. Vivian's chin trembled. "What?" "I see a woman who carries herself with dignity, even when others try to tear her down. I see someone who has survived loneliness, who still manages to command a room even when she feels invisible. Mrs. Carter, you're not defined by whispers. You're defined by your strength." Vivian's tears spilled freely now. Her defense is no match for Naomi's gentle conviction. "But what if Adrian doesn't see me anymore? What if he's already stopped loving me?" For the first time, Naomi's voice grew firm, though still kind. "Then remind him who you are. Don't wait for him to notice. Show him, and let him show you too. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other, over and over." The words lingered in Vivian's heart like a spark refusing to go out. That night, Naomi quietly approached Adrian in his study. He looked up from his laptop, surprised to see her. "Mr. Carter," she said gently, "your wife doesn't need more diamonds or more galas. She needs you. She needs to know she still matters to you as much as your company does." Adrian leaned back, the truth in her words weighing heavily. He had provided Vivian with everything money could buy: mansions, cars, jewels, but not the one thing she craved: his presence, his attention, his love spoken without words. The next day, Adrian made a decision. While Vivian was out shopping, he prepared a surprise. He asked Naomi's help to set the dining room not with grandeur, but intimacy. Instead of chandeliers blazing, he lit the room with candles. Instead of silver platters, he requested Vivian's favorite simple dishes, the ones she loved before wealth complicated their lives. Naomi arranged soft music, and Adrian, for once, stayed home on a Friday evening. When Vivian returned, she found him waiting in the dining room, dressed not in a business suit, but in a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, a bouquet of fresh lilies in his hands. "What is this?" she asked, bewildered. "A reminder," Adrian said, stepping closer. "Of us. Before the noise. Before the world started telling us who we should be." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes as he pulled out her chair, something he hadn't done in years. Dinner passed with conversation. Not about stocks or society, but about memories, dreams, small things they hadn't shared in so long. For the first time in years, they laughed together. Naomi, watching discreetly from the kitchen doorway, smiled to herself. This was what she had hoped for, not glory for her own efforts, but healing for the people she served. Over the following weeks, the Carter mansion bloomed in a way money alone could never achieve. Vivian grew softer, not weak but warmer, more gracious. The staff began to respect her genuinely, no longer out of fear but out of loyalty. She even apologized one morning to the gardener for snapping about the rose bushes, leaving him stunned, speechless. Adrian found himself drawn home more often, choosing dinners with his wife over late-night meetings. Slowly, their marriage rekindled, not with fireworks, but with the steady glow of companionship rediscovered. Vivian knew Naomi was the bridge that had saved her. One afternoon, she entered the maid's quarters unannounced. Naomi was folding linens, humming under her breath. Naomi, Vivian said softly. Naomi straightened. Yes, Mrs. Carter? Vivian hesitated, then stepped forward. Her eyes shone with unspoken emotion. I need you to know. I tried to break you. I tried to push you away like all the others. But you stayed. And because you stayed, I found myself again. I don't just thank you as my maid, I thank you as a woman who saved me. Naomi's heart swelled, but she only bowed her head with humility. I didn't save you, Mrs. Carter. You saved yourself. I just reminded you of what was already there. Vivian's lips trembled into a smile, and for the first time she pulled Naomi into an embrace. It was awkward, unfamiliar, but real. The Carter mansion was no longer a house of broken glass. It was at last a home. And all because one woman, with quiet strength and unshakable patience, had chosen to see what others ignored. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together. With love from Whispers of